Welcome to our very first episode of Great Vintage Guitars presented by Florin Media in Landau. We begin with two very early guitars of iconic makers, Gibson and Martin. Both guitars, the Martin Style 1 here and the Gibson L-1, are comparatively small-bodied instruments, very lightly built, explosive percussive tonal behavior, hence ideally suited for acoustic blues and other early musical genres such as ragtime. They're also great for fingerstyle as they're responsive to the lightest touch. My fingers barely touch the guitar and still there comes out all this sound. We begin with the Gibson L-1, which was built in 1928, the year preceding the Great Depression. It has become known as the Robert Johnson model, as perhaps the greatest blues musician of all times was once photographed with this very guitar in his hand. This very model, I have to say. I'm not sure it was this guitar, but it could have been. There are only 2 or 3 photographs in existence of Johnson, so this is highly significant. Dating can be difficult with pre-war Gibsons, as we have the serial number system only in the later instruments and also only on those higher up in the model lines. So for many, we have to go by what they call the so-called factory order numbers, which designated the order in which the instruments were manufactured and which were stamped, for example, onto the neck blocks inside the instrument. We have to thank an individual, Joe Spann, who painstakingly researched the factory order numbers and corresponding dates so that now we have a much more reliable source to date old Gibsons. So check out Spann's book titled Spann's Guide to Gibson 1902 till 1941. Now this is not the first incarnation of this model, which started in the 19-teens as a lower-end archtop version, actually, some with glue-on bridge, and evolved into the earliest flat-top model Gibson ever produced, which is this one here. It is still much closer to the parlor guitars of the 19th century in size. The body width really is only 13 inches and a half, and it has this curved, rather female body shape that would later be taken up again by Gibson and increased in size in their 1940s and 50s models such as the J200 and J185. The earliest ones in 1926 had still maple back and sides and still arch tops, which then changed to mahogany, as within this. And this configuration then lasted another 3 years before the L1 would be increased to the same 14 3/4 inches that Gibson's best-selling L00 would also sport. While I have to say I liked every L1, or indeed L00 that I played, I'm particularly fond of this early version. The mini jumbo, so to speak. It just has a certain magic that is hard to describe. And it certainly is due to structural factors such as the Honduras mahogany body and back, red spruce from the Adirondack Mountains. It's extremely lightly built with also very light braces. It's got Brazilian rosewood fretboard and bridge, and a particular distinguishing feature is its extremely short scale. I mean, Gibsons in general have short scale length, mostly 24 inches and 3/4, as opposed to the longer scale that Martin, for example, used, 25 or even 25 1/4. But this one is even extremer in terms of short scale length, as it only measures 24.5 inches. So we have this combination of very short scale length, light build, and age dried out tone wood. And all this combines, or combined with a also very thin and dried out nitro finish, the result, which is, you know, super dry sounding, ultra quick response, percussive, with the higher mid bark. That's great for blues playing, and of course also very strong treble. This one, I have to say, is a particularly great example. That was once owned and played by the great blues singer and guitar player Eric Bibb, known for his authentic fingerstyle blues playing and choice selection of stage and recording guitars. It is still fitted, as you can see, with a variety of pickups, as this is my personal guitar that I still use live on stage and also with my ensemble Glad in the studio. So that is the Gibson L-1. And now on to the Martin Style 1. And if the Gibson L-1 was, you know, a kind of grandma, this Martin would be a sort of grandma in the evolution of flat top guitars. The date of 1895 is penciled to the underside of the top. Not sure who did it. And it's got a very rare finish variant that Martin called tinted top, which to me looks just like extremely aged patina. And that was decades before the so-called shaded top finish arrived in the 1930s. It's still got the early varnish shallop type finish, a very delicate, elegant French heel, as they called it, with this little pointer towards the end. And you can see that at where the peghead meets the neck, there is this reinforcing volute, as they call it, which is, I think, a quite useful thing to have, as here is the notoriously sort of weak link in any sort of guitar. Everybody who put a precious guitar in a stand and then had his dog maybe come in and do a job, know that this is actually a great idea that should have been taken up, I think, by other makers more than it actually was taken up. Then there's this very small rectangle, the bridge, which I think looks great with the ends on both sides shaped like Egyptian pyramids, so hence the name Pyramid Bridge, which I personally think is aesthetically more pleasing than the belly bridge that Martin came up later on, obviously for structural reasons, but from an aesthetic point of view, these small bridges are just super great. Now, this is a small guitar. It's just under 13 inches wide, so rather deep at over 4 inches. And you would expect it to not weigh a ton, of course. But everybody who's taking up this guitar is still extra stunned at how super lightweight it really is. I mean, it's like a feather in your hand. Are the windows shut? Make sure, because you really feel that it might just fly out of the window otherwise. And people are also amazed at how responsive these early Martins are. But again, this could be said to be typical for lightly built instruments in general. What people who get to play this guitar tend to find utterly surprising, though, is how loud it is, how round and overall great sounding this little sucker can be. As you can also hear, not so great are the tuners, which tend to not hold the pitch very well. Anyway, this little guitar is not even lacking in bass response. And when Tobias and Kevin recorded these guitars in a fantastic ensemble the other day, I remember Tobias after the session remarked that, well, this is a guitar that is very, very hard to put down. Now, a word of caution is in place here. These 19th century Martin flat tops, actually all flat tops built up to the 1920s by Martin, were built for use with gut strings, which have considerably lower tension than steel strings, which were invented only decades later. So using steel strings on them can destroy the fragile tops with their delicate braces. So you will get a truly explosive guitar if you do this, well, until actually the day when it actually explodes right before your eyes. So perhaps not a great idea. Some smart fellows have strung them up with silk and steel strings that John Pierce developed, I think, in the 1980s, and perhaps even tuned down the guitar a half step in addition to reduce string pressure. Others have found that the best solution is to go with light gauge round core strings, steel strings, such as the Optima factory in Germany produces. They have a set of strings that they call vintage flex, and go as low as, I think, 010 or 011 gauge variants that have considerably less tension than even the silk and steel strings. But please, if you happen to own such an early beauty, don't just take my word for it. Better try with caution and see for yourself. Other features, very beautiful rosewood, of course, herringbone inlays around the sound hole, ebony fretboards, end bridge. I've always liked ebony fretboards, not only for their durability, but also because they add a little extra sparkle to the sound, I think. A rather wide neck at around 50 millimeters at the nut, so pretty good for finger picking. It's got bar frets, perhaps even original. For many, these are an acquired taste, as for the unintroduced player. Sliding across frets may be a little less easy than with flatter, more rounded frets, as all modern types actually are. But I think usually you get used to them rather quickly. The pickguard is non-original, which is clear because it would have none, but still doesn't look completely out of place, I think, as these cloud-shaped pickguards were common on other instruments of that era anyway. Now, some smart owner in the past had scratched numbers on the side of the fingerboard. I don't think that the camera can show it, but I guess, you know, in 130 years of existence, you will have gotten a lot of love, some of which, you know, might be a little more clumsy. Now, what can we say about these two in comparison? All this, of course, is objective, but here are my 2 cents. Each is an utterly amazing instrument, similarly small, light and responsive. Hence, both are fantastic blues guitars, but they're also notably different. The Martin has a more body in its sonic character. I think, in spite of its size, is an overall more complete sound that makes it a very versatile guitar that can play practically any style. The Gibson, on the other hand, is more percussive, with a bit of a honky aspect that I think is due to the bracing. It's a A-shape bracing that is an earlier variant towards the X bracing that would then become the industry standard. It's not quite as versatile as the Martin, but for percussive styles and indeed acoustic blues, it's just hard to beat. In the related video, enjoy these two early small yet great guitars with Kevin and Tobias performing an original composition of Kevin's called Heartbeat.